Hey everybody, welcome to Dad's Den of Pop Culture. Today we are doing a retrospective on Captain America Year 1, meaning the first year of published Captain America stories from, was it Timely Comics at the time? We'll just say Marvel Comics. They began in December of 1940, a year before Pearl Harbor, something to keep in mind. And we'll be taking a look at the character, how he was developed, his origin, the side characters, but especially we're going to be looking at Jack Kirby's art and how it developed and what it meant for the future Marvel universe. Let's snap right into it because there's a lot of stories. Captain America magazine had like 4 or 5 Cap stories in each one. Yeah, some of these we're going to be barely touching on. I didn't know what I was getting myself in for when I started this thing. So let's jump in with Captain America Comics number 1, like I said, December 1940, by Joe Simon and Jack Kirby. The ruthless warmongers of Europe have turned their eyes towards peace-loving America, so America's youth are called to action. And this is how a lot of Americans saw things in 1940. Europeans are working themselves into another massive war, and they want to drag us into it. And there were a lot of folks back then who did not want to be involved in something like the First World War. Well, saboteurs and spies are running wild, and the Army knows we need help. FDR asks what they would suggest, a character out of comic books like the Human Torch. But in all seriousness, the president reveals that there is something in the works. And we could see here that although Kirby's art isn't what we will see years in the future, you can see his sense of spectacle and movement and dynamism. It's all there. And that's very much what he brought to the Marvel Universe in the 1960s when he and Stan Lee were creating the Fantastic Four and all these other characters that would become real mainstays. Well, they are led to, these army guys are led to a secret base where they meet a female spy called X-13. They're about to witness an incredible experiment. A scrawny young man is injected with a serum and turns into a veritable Hercules, who it just so happens that man is going to meet several decades later. But it is at this moment that spies strike, killing the scientist who created the serum, and thus ensuring no other Americans will benefit from it. Naturally, Captain America, well, Steve Rogers, wait, it says it right there. Captain America. So he's Captain America right from the start. He takes care of the dirty skunks, and so begins his legend. But of course, when Steve Rogers isn't fighting spies, he's just a private at Camp Lehigh in New Jersey. The camp mascot, Bucky Barnes, sure wishes he could meet this great Captain America, and he gets his wish on the next page when he accidentally walks in on Steve getting into his costume. So is born the partnership of Captain America and Bucky, really rapidly in that first story. So unlike Batman and Robin, where first we get Batman, Robin seems kind of like an afterthought, the Cap and Bucky partnership is there from the very beginning. Well, their first adventure involves a theatrical act called Sando and Omar. Sando hypnotizes Omar so that Omar can predict the future. In this case, he predicts a disaster at Fort Bix, and he turns out to be right. Cap thinks this is pretty suspicious, so he and Bucky go check out the show. While there, Omar predicts a bridge exploding, and though Cap and Bucky immediately get into gear and rush out, they're too late. There is some real Kirby magic in those panels. Look at how theatrical it is. That one, it looks like an old movie, a theater poster for a movie. Just the awesome stuff, amazing stuff. When confronted, Omar makes a break for it, and Sando gets a little chin music from Cap. They hear a scream coming from Sando's dressing room and dash off to see who it is. And in fact, it is Betty Ross. Betsy Ross? Betty Ross. Ain't she pretty, Cap? Captured by spies, naturally, it all devolves into wonderful, wonderful violence. the bad guys are vanquished, and a connection is made with government agent Betty Ross. We're then treated with a prose story about Cap before we get to the third story for this issue, which involves a horrific-looking man who plots the deaths of American officials using a chessboard, and in this case, he's plotting the death of Admiral Perkins. Seems like the chessboard should have had some bigger significance, but his agents really just get their orders over the shortwave. Well, Cap and Bucky happen to go to the Admiral's speech and find him dead. They get suited up, time to kick some butt, which they do. They catch up to the killer, but the killer is in turn killed by his own men. Well, Cap and Bucky give up. They got no clues as to who these people are, so they go home. But the next day they get assigned to special duty for the visit of General Ellsworth, who just happens to be next on the murder list. But again, they're too late. The Ratsies decide they need to remove Cap and Bucky from play because eventually they're going to catch up to him. So they're next on the list now. Well, the bad guys set up a trap for Bucky because they apparently know his identity and telling him to go to a special spot to learn the identity of the killer. Bucky tries to run once he's there and discovers it's a trap, but he is stopped. Well, when Cap reads the note, he heads off and does what he does best, smashing the bad guys. Look at that action. Look at that movement, that punch, knocking the guy over. This is classic Jack Kirby. But at any rate, this ends the plot of the guy with the chessboard. It's a pretty simple story. And most of these, in fact, are kind of simple. They're more action-packed than they are complicated and twisty tales with lots of mystery in them. The final story introduces everyone's least favorite guy, the Red Skull. Basically, Cap and Bucky drive an Army major home. The major has been threatened by the Red Skull, but he doesn't believe the guy really exists. He is, of course, sadly quite wrong. Cap is soon on the job, but so is the Red Skull. While he kills American officials, his men are going to loot the First National Bank. Fortunately, Bucky, who Cap left behind for this mission, stumbles upon the villain's hideout. This leads to his capture, noticing a theme here, and his subsequent rescue by Cap. Unfortunately, the Skull manages to escape in the process. The next day, Cap and Bucky witness a new plane being tested. It is destroyed by saboteurs. Now note this panel where Steve tells off the head of the airplane company for weeping for the machine and not the men. We are building the character of Steve Rogers and what he's all about. Yes, patriot. He's fighting America's enemies, but this is a good man at heart. He's not just some super soldier sent off to do the government's work. Well, the general in charge ends up murdered by the Red Skull, who now has Cap and Bucky as next on his list. Well, this has happened before. As the Skull attacks the general's wife, Cap breaks in. Cap almost buys the farm, but with a helpful kick in the butt from Bucky, the Skull is defeated. And when they take off the mask, it turns out to be Maxon, the airplane magnate, who takes a cyanide capsule rather than be captured. So what have we learned from Cap's first issue? First, like I said, there's a lot of story here, but each story is relatively simple. It's more action than anything else. Super energetic art from Kirby, just good, solid adventure stories from Simon. We've met Cap. We got Bucky. We got Betty Ross, the government agent. And we've seen the Red Skull, although maybe it's not quite the Red Skull that we're going to see in later years. Captain America Comics #2, February 1941. And I'm going to bring this up too, which I should have mentioned the first issue. They do tell you that these stories are set in 1942. So Simon and Kirby are assuming that by 1942, the United States is going to be essentially at war with Nazi Germany. Now, they don't really they do, but they don't. The covers definitely do. Sometimes they're kind of vague about who these bad guys are. Remember, we're in February of 1941 here, so we're a few months ahead of Pearl Harbor and all the declarations of war and all that stuff. But the winds were blowing, and a lot of people knew where this was all going to ultimately head. Okay. Well, in Cap's second foray, we get a slight change to the costume in the mask department. and to the shield, which is now circular, like we expect it to be. Cap has 3 different cases in this issue. Case number 1 involves Betty Ross, and, well, whatever the hell that thing is, apparently it is the ageless Oriental who wouldn't die. Okay, I know. A lot of people don't like terms like that anymore. It's 1941. The term Oriental was certainly not meant to be, an insult. It just means Eastern. Occidental is Western, right? The dividing line, in case you didn't know, Jerusalem. Okay, so it's really not that much different at that point in time than saying Asian. Okay, so at any rate, but we'll hope this one doesn't get me into too much trouble. The story begins with 2 bankers plotting how to get out of tax evasion. One of them decides murder is his best bet. Betty Ross is investigating the case, and here's shots discovering a man named Thompson, who she apparently knows, almost dead. We see a weird shadow slinking away, and Thompson tells her it can't be killed. Well, Thompson, any relation to Flash Thompson? Maybe. Was strangled, so those shots were fired by him. That means the weird assassins could not be killed with bullets. One of the bankers wants nothing to do with murder, so he's out. The other, Benson, doesn't like that, so send in the ghouls. That task through, he sends them after Betty. Well, Cap and Bucky are keeping track of her, and they witness the attack and leap in to do battle. Again, Kirby's art is a little bit rough here, but look at the poses and look at that dynamic action. The full extension of Captain America punching that ghoul in the face. If you've ever read How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way, right? They go into that stuff. Look at him running there. Look at that extension. It's a little bit more than is maybe natural or realistic, but that was the Marvel way of comics. And even though How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way is something that's coming out like in the 80s or so, based on the Kirby art, this is the 40s. It's already there. Kirby really is the foundation of the Marvel Universe and the way Marvel comic books are designed. Well, Betty is saved, but the ghouls get away. When Betty visits Camp Lehigh the next day, a giant ghoul attacks. It's a close call, but they destroy him with a grenade, even though it didn't even nick his skin. Now, apparently, this attack was not intended, and Benson is angry that it might have given them away. Well, Benson sends his ghouls out on a spree, robbing banks, etc. Cap and Bucky jump in and do their best. Again, great action scenes here. This is very much the Cap that we're going to see in the MCU, right up into, the 80s, 90s, etc. The ghouls take Cap down by sheer weight of numbers, captured by Benson. He is told the story of these creatures coming from Tibet. It's always from Tibet in comic books from this period. They discovered that they could be stopped with loud noises like explosions, but apparently not machine gun blasts, which I guess are just not loud enough. Well, while Benson tells the story, Bucky tracks them down, and this time he rescues Cap, which is kind of a nice little twist. Another battle ensues, and is finally won when they set off a cannon. The day is saved. In case number 2, we see Cap and Bucky going into Germany to sock the Fuhrer. Oh, let me get there we go, to sock the Fuhrer. Okay. When a financier who's going to help Britain is attacked by Ratsy spies, Cap and Bucky intervene. Unfortunately, the financier, Baldwin, is whisked away. There's nothing to do but follow. Now, since Steve Rogers is in the army, he can't just easily leave base and traipse off to Europe. This requires a disguise. Well, this gets maybe a little bit weird. Well, at least he has the legs for it. That's all I can say. There are some misadventures on the plane over. Of course, Henry Baldwin is spotted on the plane, but after a fight, disappears once again. It turns out the Baldwin they saw on the plane is a fake and a spy. He's going to sign with Mussolini instead of Churchill, and that will sway the smaller countries of Europe to the Axis side. At Buckingham Palace the next day, Bucky spots him carrying his cane in the wrong hand, so he tackles him. Some Ratsies open up with machine guns, and they kill the fake Baldwin. Now, Cap and Bucky have to find the real Baldwin, and a note clues them in that he's in a concentration camp in the Black Forest. Well, off they go, and they immediately start kicking Ratsy butt. Simon and Kirby do not waste time. But who should be visiting that camp but the head rat himself, old Schickelgruber? They're planning a gruesome execution for Baldwin, but Cap stops it. And yes, we get to see Cap and Bucky kick Hitler and Goering's Ratsy butts right here. You know, the famous cover of him punching Hitler. Well, he does, in fact. Well, actually, you see Bucky there, right, going into their stomachs, but they do, in fact, punch the top guys of the Ratsy party. Good stuff. Well, finally, in case number 3, this is an old trope, but it is a good one. Murder in a wax museum. The case opens with the head of a spy ring called the Wax Man killing one of his underlings for failure. He plans to do the same to Bucky after the super tanks are finished. At Camp Lehigh, soldiers are warned of the Wax Man, and Cap gets an idea. He rushes to tell Senator Keats, but finds him dead at the hands of the Wax Man. Time to snap into action. Meanwhile, the super tanks are finished. They rumble to the surface from their underground hideout and go forth to conquer America, starting with Camp Lehigh. Cap and Bucky leap into action and manage to commandeer one of these super tanks. With it, they destroy the others. The immediate danger over, Steve Rogers is punished for abandoning his post while he was off being Captain America. While he's clearing out one of the stables, he finds out that Bucky has been kidnapped. Well, Cap is not about to take this lying down. He heads into town and comes across a wax museum, the perfect hideout for the Wax Man. The Ratsies get the drop on him and take him into the basement to be liquidated. First, of course, the Wax Man tells him his plan of destroying America with remote-controlled bombers, i.e. drones, just about 80 years early. Well, Cap has heard all that he needs to, and that's all he can stand. He can't stand no more. He breaks his bonds, frees Bucky, and they go to town on the bad guys. Waxman nearly escapes, but when he's taken down by Bucky, they discover he was really Mayor Dobbs, and America is saved. And now it's back to the stables for Steve Rogers for his punishment. Love the way you have him having to be just this buck private getting yelled at by a sergeant, and he's also America's greatest hero. Also love the super tanks. You know, when you watch the Captain America movie and you got all the crazy stuff, and they made it Hydra, you know, more so than just being the Ratsies. But you look at some of that crazy super technology, it was right there from the get-go in the old comic book. So very, very on brand there. Captain America Comics number 3, March of 1941. Well, 2 issues in, and we've seen Steve and Bucky take down quite a few spies and punch Hitler in the nose as well. For the next few issues, I'm going to stick mostly to highlights so this video, you know, isn't 3 hours long. Well, the Red Skull makes a return appearance in this one, and he has plans. No, wait, wasn't he actually that airplane? Okay, I think they said, well, this is a good villain. We got to keep this guy around. We're going to have to bring him in one way or another. The story begins with the Skull awakening after his last battle and swearing revenge on Captain America. Meanwhile, Steve Rogers and Bucky are worrying about a high-level conference at the camp where they're discussing plans for the new power drill. Now, I'm assuming they don't mean something created by Black and Decker. Well, the Major entrusted with the plans of the power drill is attacked by the Red Skull. He fights back, but loses the bout. Steve and Bucky discover the body, the Skull having already fled with the plans. But they find his calling card, a Red Skull, which is a bit on the nose, but that's fine, and know that their old enemy has returned. Again, look at the motion Kirby puts into the poses, the kind of extremes that will become standard at Marvel later on. These comics are just fun. They're fun to look at. And it's a little bit rough, but still, just the energy is amazing. Well, the Ratsies jump Cap and Bucky in an alley while they search for clues. We get this wonderful fight scene. There's a lot of fight scenes. Again, action, action, action is what they're going for in these things. The Skull has not been idle. Just look at these panels. Look at how Kirby this is. The angles. Look at the upper thing with just the skull with the papers around him. This is how you draw comic strips. This is how you do it. And Kirby, at this early stage, knew how to do it. Okay. Well, the Skull says he'll even make Hitler shake with fear. Ooh, turning on his master, huh? Soon he's attacking New York City with the power drill. Buildings collapse. Thousands are probably killed, and it's heading towards Brooklyn. But when it attacks Ebbets Field, you know the Skull has gone too far. Cap and Bucky, along with some machine gun armed cops, chase the Skull and his guys off. But then a new twist. Some gangsters dress a couple of thugs as Cap and Bucky to put on shows for kids and make some dishonest money. Unfortunately, they run into the real deals and short work is made of them, and their day gets worse when the two fakers are then confronted by the Red Skull. Now, Golden Age kids comics could get pretty dark. The Skull hangs the two crooks, killing them, and now he thinks Cap and Bucky are gone. Well, they arrive just too late to save the fakers, and a fight starts. The Skull tries to use his touch of death on Bucky, but no dice. They know he does it with electricity, and they're prepared. In the end, he lobs a bomb at our heroes, who lob it back, and kaboom! The Skull is no more. Well, he's probably not gone for good. Case number 2 has Cap and Bucky on a movie set, preventing a saboteur from stopping a picture that will rouse people in defense of democracy. The villain reminds me a little bit of the bad guy in the Rocketeer movie played by Timothy Dalton. And then there's this prose story. They always have a prose story by some kid named Stan Lee. Probably never going to hear from that guy again. And then they go up against the Butterfly. Not a real great supervillain name, but an awesome design. He's stealing diamonds from a museum, and Bucky and Cap get involved and stop him. This one was really more of a crime-fighting story than a spy-smashing story, and you're going to actually get quite a few of those in this book. Captain America Comics number 4, April of 1941. This case begins with numerous murders, industrialists, labor leaders. In one case, apparently by the Wicked Witch from Snow White, this murder is witnessed by Steve and Bucky, so they follow the fake beggar and find a secret society dedicated to destroying democracy. Bucky infiltrates, discovers they are ratsies, and ultimately is captured. Just as the leader is about to, Bucky, and also a G-Man, Cap busts in and a patriotic ass-kicking follows. Dude, dig this panel. Bucky does not play around. The leader escapes, fleeing to a waiting launch, which he takes out to a Ratsy submarine. Cap and Bucky swim out and infiltrate. And by the way, we do get complaints, understandably, about the depiction of the Japanese in World War II era comics. It's understandable. Bear in mind, the Germans were also caricatured as brutes in these things. They usually have kind of a Neanderthal look and stuff. So it wasn't just something done to our enemies across the Pacific. It was also done to our enemies across the Atlantic. It's kind of just how they did things back then. In fact, if you look at just how crooks were portrayed in these comic books back in the day, they're usually portrayed as being brutish and ugly and all that stuff too. Evil people are ugly, good people are handsome. It's kind of goes back even to fairy tales. So, just keep that in mind. Well, Cap and Bucky kick some Kriegsmarine butt, but King Rags, the leader of the beggars, escapes in a one-man submersible and heads back to his hideout. Cap is hot on his heels, but King Rags has time to free his men from the cage that Bucky put them in, and they are not in a forgiving mood. Some of the Cap art here reminds me of the horror comics of the day. I mean, look at those. Look at those faces. Look at those fangs. A lot of fangs on seemingly just normal human bad guys in Captain America comics. Well, this leads to another slugfest, which the good guys, surprise, actually win. It's a very simple story, really a chase punctuated by several fight scenes. That's pretty typical of Captain America back then. The next case involves Betty Ross being captured by Ivan the Terrible, King of the Tartars in Siberia. Yep, absolutely. And dude, look at that one picture up in that panel of him knocked over. Dude, that almost looks like it could be Volstagg in a Thor comic from the 60s. Well, at any rate, Cap and Bucky are also arrested in his kingdom as they wear strange clothing and might be spies. Ivan decides to kick Cap's butt, and of course finds out this was a mistake. This lands all the visiting Americans in the dungeon. Turns out Ivan took the throne from the rightful king, Peter Ross, Betty's dad. And Cap and Bucky have to liberate the country and put Peter on the throne, which they do. And if this seems really kind of odd, and by the way, again, does that not remind you of Asgard and Thor? There it is, man. Well, if it does seem odd, it's because it was actually all of a dream. If it seems weird, remember by this time, Batman had already had an adventure in Storybook Land and would soon be traveling through time. So it's very much how they did Golden Age comics at the time. Well, Cap's final case in this issue has the same plot as an old Andy Griffith episode, almost, with counterfeiters operating out of an old house, which they've made seem haunted to keep people away. Reports of the haunted house pique Cap's curiosity. They skirmish with some fake ghosts and then discover the counterfeiting operation. Naturally, Betty Ross got there first, but she's tied to a chair, so, Cap and Bucky mop up the mob, but discover from Betty that their leader is not there. The next day, Cap sneaks away from maneuvers and goes undercover as a farmer, attracting the attention of the city slickers, printing all the funny money. No, I don't mean the Federal Reserve. This allows him to find their hideout so he and Bucky can mop them up. Again, simple stories in this one with the emphasis on action. The fourth case also has a horror theme, a sanitarium of horrors. Cap gets involved when Bucky gets injured fighting some robbers. There they meet Dr. Grimm. Doesn't really look like the guy you want to have treating you. Well, while Bucky stays overnight, he encounters a monstrosity. Eventually, Grimm discovers he's connected with Captain America, and so he kidnaps him. Cap goes to investigate and gets into the soup. Of course, Betty turns out to be there as well. She's always one step ahead, but unfortunately that step always puts her, in danger. She's always tied up or something. Grimm is running a laboratory where he is breeding monsters, including Goro. Ultimately, Goro and Grimm are both dispatched. Bucky shoots Goro, and Grimm falls to his death in a fight with Cap. But look, we got classic Kirby monsters right there in 1941. Captain America Comics number 5, May of 1941. In case 1, Cap takes on the Ringmaster of Death, which immediately reminded me of the evil Ringmaster who appeared first in Incredible Hulk number 3. Well, this Ringmaster has a wheel of death with the faces of his enemies on it. He spins to decide who dies next. Today, it is General Blaine, although you notice Cap and Bucky are on the wheel. He calls in Tommy Thumb to do the deed, and when he refuses, he is whipped. If you're new to comics, you might have missed the subtle clues that the Ringmaster of Death is evil. Well, Blaine is indeed attacked by a tiger. Cap fights it off, but too late. Bucky spies the fleeing Tommy Thumb and follows, but he gets rapped on the head by a thug, and Cap returns the favor. There's not too much mystery to this one. Cap knows he needs to investigate the Ringmaster as soon as he's done peeling potatoes. Meanwhile, the Ringmaster chooses his next victim, Defense Commissioner Newsom. Check the way Kirby drops his chin below the panel there. Really, really interesting. Betty figures Newsom might be a target, so she heads his way and almost gets kidnapped in the process. We get a nice shot of Cap blocking gunfire with his shield here. And the circus strongman slugs Cap from behind, knocks him for a loop. But now they know where to go to find the bad guys. Cap and Bucky fight their way through the strongman, the missing link, and other circus folk, and finally have to rescue Betty from a plunge to her death with some acrobatic work. The results are not too good for the Ringmaster. Now, the next case involves Captain Okada, the Master of Death. So we have to tread carefully here because this is a Golden Age comic. We weren't at war with Japan or Germany yet, but remember, this is set a year into the future, and Simon and Kirby they were actually pretty bang on with what was going to be happening. I mean, except for the giant super tanks and the drill that destroys half of New York. They were a little off on that stuff. Well, in this one, a Hawaiian reports a sea dragon that swallowed his friends to the Navy. They send out a patrol boat, and they find the dragon and are swallowed by it as well. Pearl Harbor, of course, has not happened yet. They didn't assume that was going to actually be what got us into the war. Captain Okada, though, is intent on destroying the American Navy and humbling the nation for the Axis powers. His plan is to pack a volcano in Hawaii with dynamite and set off a huge eruption. Just what you want in a comic book. Cap and Bucky get involved, of course, and end up venturing into the belly of the beast, and we get this totally rad schematic. One of the things I love so much about old comics is when they would draw up these schematics. And again, you look at this one, and this looks like it could come out of 1960s Kirby work. It really does. And it's absolutely beautiful. Well, the good guys, of course, end up winning, but it seems for a while that Cap is killed in an explosion. But don't worry, Cap can get through that. Oh, and also dig this ad for the all winners. Did Subby color his hair there for a while? I don't like it. He should go back to the black for sure. Well, the final case involves ratsy fifth columnists trying to force German Americans into their ranks, beating them up if they refuse. This kind of stuff actually did, to some degree, happen. This story introduces the young Sentinels of Liberty who help Cap and Bucky, shades of the Newsboy Legion here, and reminiscent of the East Side Kids Bowery Boys stuff. You get racial diversity and a caricature that could have been worse, but wouldn't go over great today. You know, baby steps to getting it right. Oh, and you can also become a Sentinel of Liberty as well for the price of one thin dime. Captain America Comics number 6, June of 1941. We're past the halfway point here. We're kind of at the halfway point. And while we haven't seen a massive amount of work put into a Captain America mythos, we got the Round Shield, we got Bucky, Red Skull, Sentinels of Liberty, the all-winners. We have seen the templates being laid down for the much later Marvel Universe, the way it looks, the flow of action, etc. This book starts with a splash page that wouldn't have felt out of place in an old EC comic. Cap is taking on the Camera Fiend and his darts of doom. The Camera Fiend is a real goon. His camera shoots poison darts, and he's after the crown jewels that are showing up tomorrow on the good ship Britannia. Dude almost looks like he belongs in a Fabulous Furry Freak Brothers comic. A pair of his thugs run into Steve and Bucky, who are arriving from Camp Lehigh to provide security. And after a scuffle, they get into their fighting togs and crash the Camera Fiend's party. Bucky convinces Professor Lucius Hall, to bring the Sentinels of Liberty to a sightseeing tour of the Statue of Liberty so he can be on hand to help Steve when the Britannia arrives. Sure enough, the Camera Fiend murders the courier of the crown jewels, and his men gun down the crew of the ship. Cap and Bucky arrive, and much butt is kicked. The Camera Fiend escapes, but the jewels are safe and are taken to Camp Lehigh for safety. You kind of notice the formula a bit here is initial encounter, big fight, bad guy escapes. We get a second encounter, and sometimes there's a capture involved and somebody's tied up and threatened, and eventually the good guys win. So, you know, fairly formulaic tales with Captain America, but again, it's all about that action. It's all about those fight scenes. That's really what they're going for. Well, the Fiend isn't done yet. He replaces Bucky's camera with his own dart shooting camera. But Cap's reflexes save him from certain death. He decides, though, to play dead to trap the Camera Fiend, but he's overheard. Notice also, the outer ring of Cap's shield has been changed here from blue to red, which is what we're more used to in the comic books. Now, realizing he's failed when the Camera Fiend writes him a sarcastic note, Cap decides to go to school with Bucky the next day because he's figured out the identity of the Camera Fiend. It is Professor Lucius Hall. He makes another attempt on Cap's life, and then all hell breaks loose with the young Sentinels of Liberty beating the crap out of their elderly but evil teacher. And that ends that. Case 2, Cap and Bucky meet the Fang, arch-fiend of the Orient. In this one, the Tong of the Fang in San Francisco decides to aid the Japanese Baron Nushima in stopping 2 Chinese emissaries from receiving an American loan to help fight the Japanese. Now, at that time, the Japanese were invading China actively, so that war was happening. Though I don't know that the Tong would help the Japanese. Maybe they did. I have no idea about that. That's something interesting to look into. The Fang is not impressed that they are being guarded by some guy named Steve Rogers. Well, this one is a pretty simple tale. The assassins attack, manage to kidnap Bucky and Chan, the emissary, and Steve is questioned by the police. He breaks prison that night and he goes to work on the tong in their hideout. Look at that. Fully extended legs, man. Captain America is he's a very flexible guy. By the time he gets there, Betty has also been captured, but here's a big deal. As Bucky is about to be decapitated, Captain America throws his mighty shield. The fang ends up getting polished off by Captain America, and the Chinese emissary is saved. The next case pits him against the Hangman in a murder mystery. Dr. Vardoff has invented a super silk as strong as steel. He is approached by Dino Cardi, representing certain business interests, the mob, who wants his formula. He sends him away, and then a doll comes a-knockin', selling protection. His final visitor is an army major who gets a warmer greeting. He's supposed to return that night for his super silk parachute for testing. Well, that night, the Hangman strikes, hanging Vardoff with a noose made from his super silk, and then setting the laboratory on fire. Looks like a job for Captain America and Bucky. Cap and Bucky wind up knocked out and are too late to save the Doctor. Worse than that, when they escape, they are attacked by a mob wanting to hang them for burning down the building. Simon and Kirby went hard back in the day. Look at some of that stuff. I mean, look at Cap. He's hanging, man. Well, escaping mob justice, Cap and Bucky return to the scene of the crime the next day to look for clues, as do Ludwig, the Doctor's assistant, and the lady who is part of the protection racket. They get the bum rush, and while fighting the Hangman's thugs, the girl and Ludwig are both hanged. And there is a death toll in old Captain America comics. In the end, the glass eye leads Cap to the solution. The Hangman is, in fact, Vardoff himself. He substituted another's body for his own so he could be left alone to work on his science. Think there would be easier ways to do that. He gives the Cap the formula for the super silk and then says he must pay for the Hangman's crimes with acid. Big takeaway, though. They figured out that Cap's shield is good for throwing. So this is kind of a major issue. Captain America Comics number 7, August 1941. In issue number 7, Cap's old foe, the Red Skull, is back, and this time he's packing a piccolo. His calling card for this case is whistling the funeral march before he strikes. He's an evil man, but he has flair. You have to give him that. A couple of the Skull's old henchmen decide to scamper away with the dough that he left behind, but they were fools to think the Red Skull was actually dead. News of the murder reached Steve and Bucky just before a rehearsal of the camp show is to go on. A costume change is in order, but this time into the clothes of the gay 90s. As the conductor strikes up the band, they hear the funeral march being whistled. The conductor's baton glows eerily, and then he falls over dead. This brings another costume change as Cap and Bucky, and yeah, let's get that out there. Cap's partner is Bucky. Steve Rogers' buddy is Bucky Barnes. Nobody puts that together. All right, whatever. They start an investigation. The baton was covered with a fast-acting poison. Now, while they study the baton, an attempt is made on their lives. They catch the culprit, but he claims to be a simple British stagehand. Once Cap and Bucky leave, he reveals himself to be the Red Skull. The rehearsal resumes, but is interrupted again by a scream from General King's room. Cap and Bucky bust in and are surrounded by the Red Skull and his machine gun-armed henchmen. Just as they open fire, Cap blocks their bullets with his shield, and much butt is kicked. Fortunately, the Skull gets away with King, and the MPs think Cap is involved. He's got to slug them to get him out of the way. He just manages to save King. The next case has a gangster trying to buy a piece of the famous Brooklyn Badgers baseball team. The Blue Sox are mentioned, and that was actually one of the names of Gotham City's baseball teams during the Golden Age. Well, this is your garden variety. It would be a shame if anything happened to your star players scenario. And speaking of Gotham City, this guy is behind it, killing a couple star players before Cap gets involved. Ultimately, he has to take over as pitcher. What's more American than Captain America playing the national pastime? Check out this page. The bad guy called the Toad, not the bat, the Toad, ends up being the Badgers' manager. He leaps to his death to avoid being arrested again. There's a much bigger death toll in Captain America comics and Superman comics than in Batman comics. So get that whole super Dark Knight thing out of your head. Cap and Superman, way rougher on the bad guys back in the day. His final case in this comic involves the mad musician who can cause radios to explode with his musical notes. Senator Benson is the first to go. Cap investigates and discovers the butler hiding evidence. There was a bomb in that radio. How does that work? Comic book science, just go with it. When the regiment attends a concert that night, the mad musician uses his special fiddle to hypnotize the audience. They awaken at the end of the concert feeling emotionally drained. And the next morning, Senator Lee is dead. Cap goes undercover as a butler and manages to dig up some clues, sending him and Bucky to Senator Shore's house, where they keep Shore's butler in the room with the radio during the performance to prove that he's part of the murder scheme. When he confesses, he gets a little chin music from the maestro there. And that just leaves a confrontation with the mad musician himself, who actually ends up killing himself with his own music. And again, look at that. Look at that character, the caricature involved and the villain. You get that with a lot of this early Kirby stuff. Bad guys aren't just bad guys. They're really weird looking. You even get that in the 1960s with a lot of the stuff that he does. It's just kind of how they do things. Well, Captain America Comics number 8, September 4th, 1941. An amazing cover. You got Ratsies, you got Ghouls, you got Bucky in an Iron Maiden sarcophagus. And for D&D players, this issue, they're in the Tomb of Horror. And it's actually not far off from that D&D module, as this one, from the personal files of Captain America, concerns the strange mystery of the Ruby of the Nile. Pyramids, dungeons, mummies, you get the idea. Well, they packed it into these things. Turns out a friend of Betty Ross has purchased the famed Ruby of the Nile, an expensive jewel. This fact comes out in the camp canteen, and Sergeant Duffy gets a pie in the back of the head in the process. Steve is worried it will lead to foul play. Not the pie, the jewel. Well, the background to the sale involves, you guessed it, a curse, and there just may be something to this. For as one of the co-owners seeks to retrieve the jewel for cutting, he has a run-in with Ra. Steve and Bucky notice the smoke as they're leaving the house and rush back to intercept the Egyptian, but they fail to hold on to him. The two make contact with Betty and fill her in on what happened, and then they rush off. After they leave, the ruby is apparently stolen by the ghostly pharaoh, but it turns out it was Cap. He snuck in, and when the lights went out, took the ruby just in case something non-supernatural was actually after it. But the pharaoh, as they call him, isn't through. He attacks the remaining owner of the ruby and flees. Betty pops off a shot at him but misses. I love Betty. Great character. Yeah, sometimes damsel in distress, but man, she's in there fighting the whole way. She's not a shrinking violet by any means. The next time the pharaoh appears, he tries to kidnap Betty, but Cap and Bucky are ready for him. When all is said and done, it turns out to be a normal human being, Henry Saunders, the man who found the ruby in the first place. He would have gotten away with it too if it hadn't been for those snooping Captain America and Bucky. Case 2 pits Cap against foreign agent Pierre Dumore, a demon in a beret. The story starts with Bucky playing a prank on the barracks, itching powder in the cots, which leads to a brawl. A bucket of water on Sergeant Duffy's head only makes it worse. We are seeing a little more development of side characters now in Sergeant Duffy. Steve and everyone else end up in the guardhouse, leaving Bucky on his own. Well, he overhears Major Dumore of the Free French Forces say he wants to hand over French patents to Colonel Carter. When Dumore leaves and his car won't start, thanks to Bucky, the colonel springs Steve to fix it. This frees him up to participate in maneuvers, in other words, war games. The sham invaders get a little rough, though, when they think Steve is snooping around, and he needs to kick a little blue army butt. The next day, they figure it out when they find the other side is using live ammunition. Not really supposed to do that in war games. This sends Cap into investigation mode, and he discovers the Frenchman is no friend of America. A little crash bam clears things up and ends the threat to the US of A. I love that crash bam. That is absolutely amazing. And look at those guys. The guy like on his head. Kirby is so good. Our final case this issue is Case of the Black Witch. So another seemingly supernatural threat for this issue. Cap and Bucky are taking a shortcut back to camp when they come across an old castle and hear a woman scream. They find some thugs in the act of a kidnapping and treat them quite roughly. Turns out they've wandered into an old chestnut. The woman, Karen Lee, must stay in the castle 3 nights to inherit it from her uncle. Not an easy thing because the place is haunted by the Black Witch. And I love the witch design. So good. I won't get too deep into this one because I think we all know where it's going. But check out this panel. I mean, come on. That is like classic Kirby. Cap and Bucky basically have to sneak out of camp each night to protect Karen and then wind up being exhausted the next day and tormented by Sergeant Duffy as a result. We get battles with ghosts and devils, some Scooby-Doo fake monster action. And in the end, it's a crooked lawyer who is playing the witch. Captain America Comics number 9, September 30th, 1941. In 8 issues, we've gotten plenty of action, a recurring villain in the Red Skull. We're starting to get some development of the supporting cast. Lots of amazing art. It's easy to see why kids loved Cap, although I wouldn't say they're doing much world building at this point as they did in Batman. Weird opening, though, for case number 1. Steve and Bucky are strolling through the suburbs of Lehigh City when they hear a scream. They dash into the Harrow mansion and find the butler dead, his neck broken, and a note from the White Death telling him and Bucky to get out. Steve searches around but doesn't find anyone, so he tips the cops, and he and Bucky get back to camp. Anyone else notice the bust of Satan in the background? Kind of a weird thing to have, just sitting around your house. A little self-promotion in the middle of a murder never hurt anybody. Say, this copy of Marvel Comics is swell. Well, it turns out that Josiah Harrow's survivors are meeting that night at the mansion for the reading of the will. It's another old chestnut. Cap investigates. At the reading, they introduce the suspects, and one, Jim Slade, stands out as he is the first to mention the White Death that threatens them all. But one relative is delayed, so the reading must be put off, and this gives Cap and Bucky a chance to sneak in and poke around. They find another body. A scream sends them running to find the White Death carrying away one of the relatives, Lucy Harrow. Cap and Bucky foil the plot, but Whitey gets away. While Cap chats with Lucy, Jim Slade is lured outside by a note and takes a knife to the back. This sends Cap and Bucky dashing off to find the White Death, while other relatives accuse Josiah Harrow's brother of the crime. Cap and Bucky run into the White Death and knock him cold as a mackerel, but a gunshot rings out at Cap. The bullet was meant for the White Death, who turns out to be Manuel Perez, son-in-law of the late Josiah. Case is solved, primarily with running and punching. Kind of reminds me of something Leonard Nimoy talked about. Like, what's the difference between a Star Trek movie you direct and a Star Trek movie Shatner directs? He says there's a lot more running when Shatner is directing. Well, when gangster Tony Scarlatti is shot, he manages to call the police, but doesn't stay live long enough to finger his murderer. Scarlatti's murder sets off a crime wave, so Cap and Bucky get involved, and so does Betty Ross. Betty tracks the murderer to an abandoned warehouse where she is promptly captured and nearly killed, if not for Cap saving her. Turns out the shooter was Nick Pinto, who winds up getting the electric chair. But it doesn't end there. The prison doctor secretly brings Nick back to life for $100,000. When he tries to escape the prison morgue, Cap is waiting, and they get into a huge brawl with an assist from Betty Ross. Pinto breaks loose, the doctor gets his, and Betty plays hostage one more time before he finishes himself off when he tries to climb an electric fence, and an alert guard turns on the juice. Again, Golden Age comics, written for kids, but there is a huge death toll. Cap's final adventure in this issue is against the Black Talon. There's a shadowy black hand strangling people in an art gallery, and even Bucky gets his turn. The murderer is an artist with one black hand, one normal, who is driven to create masterpieces of death. He goes on a murder spree and almost kills Cap in the process, but in the end, Cap does a little investigating, discovering a story about an artist, Pascal Horta, whose hand was injured in a car crash. Cap and Bucky go to visit the artist and clash with his thugs, and now we get it full on 100% Captain America throws his mighty shield and those who choose to oppose his shield have to yield. Well, in the end, the Black Talon escapes to plague Cap and Bucky again, apparently in Young Allies number 2. But look at this guy. He's got fangs. He's a normal human being. I mean, he has a screwed up hand, but he's a normal human being. But he has fangs. That's how they do villains in old Jack Kirby comics. Captain America Comics number 10, November of 1941. We have reached the eve of America's entry into World War II, precipitated by the attack on Pearl Harbor. But we're seeing Cap's foes go from being ratsy saboteurs to more traditional villains for comic books at the time. Well, let's see what happens in this issue. The splash page gives us Cap on a motorcycle. We're going to see a lot of that in the future. And they're leaning into the case file stuff as the story is as narrated to Joe Simon and Jack Kirby. So yes, Captain America and Bucky are real. The story sees Steve and Bucky driving a truck at night, delivering an unknown cargo. When they stop to help a woman collapsed in the road, they are ambushed by thugs. The woman orders them killed, and when her men can't do it, she leaves it to a grenade and escapes with the truck. Not a very nice woman. Well, in fact, she is the Countess Mara, a real charmer. The Ratsy spies have a man on a motorcycle scouting ahead, and he, at one point, spots Bucky going for help and nearly machine guns him when, clang. So Cap is definitely throwing his shield now, takes the guy right off his bike. Cap commandeers the bike, and he and Bucky track him down to the fortress hideout. They bust in, they get into a colossal slugfest because it's Marvel and it's Kirby. Sadly, the Countess gets them again with knockout gas. And now we can see the basic Cap formula 100% here. Incident happens to get Cap involved, find the enemy and immediately attack only to be captured, or the enemy to escape. Rinse and repeat until the bad guys are all unconscious. This isn't complex, but it wasn't meant to be, and it is very action-packed. That's what they want. In this case, they have to escape a dungeon of fire and dew, and I love this panel because it is so Jack Kirby. You see exactly this kind of action pose in his future work all the time, with Cap leaping down on top of everybody. It's a nice ending. I'm going to let you return to Germany because rats of your kind don't deserve to live in a free land, even in prison. Heck yeah. This does mark the return, though, of Ratsies to the pages of Captain America. Well, the mayor of a great American city broadcasts a nationwide request. Gotham City is ready for its... What? I did check now. The name Gotham City is used in Batman in issue number 4 in January of 1941. So Batman does get there first, but apparently the mayor's pretty impressed with Captain America. So Gotham's mayor invites Cap to his bond drive, and he accepts. When they arrive, they are booked into a hotel of death. It's a setup. Cap is nabbed, and when Bucky brings in a cop, the staff acts like he's crazy. This is actually a pretty classic story. I think in the original stories, it would be everybody pretends that the person hadn't been there because they've come down with like the plague or something, and they're trying to hide it. At any rate, it's an old trope in stories. Well, Cap ends up a prisoner, and Bucky ends up in a cell block because they think he's crazy. Bucky escapes and goes back to the hotel undercover as a bellboy until they discover him. He finds Cap apparently being tortured by these goons in robes until it is revealed that the victim was actually one of the goons, and Cap was wearing a robe. The other goons find this shocking. Look at that art, by the way. Look at that art. That is freaking amazing. During the ensuing fight, the hotel catches fire and the bad guys sizzle, except for the leader of the spies, who is captured. Again, it's one hell of a death toll in Captain America comics. The final Cap story in this issue is a takeoff of the Hound of the Baskervilles. We start with some army humor and Steve getting thrown in the pokey and the arrival of a bedraggled man from Cardiff Manor pleading for help. Cap breaks jail, and off he and Bucky go, where they soon encounter the ghostly Hound. The degree to which Captain America overlaps with horror in these books is actually pretty remarkable. If you know Sherlock Holmes, you know how this goes. And if you know Cap, you know that dog is getting beamed by a shield at some point. Oh, there it is. The twist is that this one includes a guy in a dog suit. I bet Conan Doyle wishes he'd thought of that one. Of course, in the end, the plot to steal the inheritance is uncovered, and good triumphs over evil. And folks, there we have the first year of Captain America stories. Now, the original Captain America would run until issue 78, May of 1954, now fighting off the communist hordes. Yeah, the commies, just as bad as the Ratsies. Don't you forget it. And he would, of course, be revived in Avengers number 4 from January of 1964, really less than 10 years later, but with retconning a little bit later on, and I really don't like that term in the practice, but such that now he disappeared during World War II, and the post-war Caps were other men wearing the costume, and unfortunately often maligned because of the anti-communist stance of those comics. Remember, Iron Man, the Fantastic Four, and other 60s Marvel characters did lots of commie fighting as well, so there was that maligning comes later on, like in the 70s and 80s. So final thoughts on Captain America. There's not a heck of a lot of character development, but there is tons of action. The side characters, they come along after a while, but they're never super important to the stories. There's a strong horror element throughout. Lots of Axis enemies at the start. That mellowed out a little bit as we got closer to the war, and then obviously is going to get more intense after we actually go to war. And we do get to see the shield tossed around a bit. So a lot of the basics, a lot of the fundamentals of Captain America are there in the first year, mixed in with some extraordinary Jack Kirby art. Just beautiful stuff. These are fun, action-packed comic books. And again, I can totally see why kids loved them. Well, folks, let me know what you think of Captain America and his mighty shield in the comments. I would love to hear from you. If you enjoyed this retrospective of Cap's origins, please give it a like, maybe subscribe, maybe share with a friend. But until next time, God bless everybody. Please be kind to one another. Have a little bit of fun out there. And I will see you hopefully again soon. Dad's Den of Pop Culture. God bless America.